Hello guys, I'm Super Ron, welcome back to the channel, and we're back in the G unit, and we're back with a familiar face to the channel. You've seen this Mark 1 Caddy on a previous episode. It's got the 20 valve turbo conversion, and it came in to diagnose some running problems. It used to have a real hard time starting, used to pop and bang, and eventually after checking everything around the bay, it found the cam belt was 2 teeth out, but luckily there was no piston to valve contact, so we were lucky enough to be able to take the belt off, time it up properly, put it back on, and it has been fine ever since. That's more like it. This car is a lot of fun. It was already converted when the owner bought it, but now it has started to die again. There was a little intermittent fault which has almost become permanent, and that is the throttle isn't working. So he'll be out driving, then all of a sudden lose any throttle control. It'll just sit there on idle, and no matter what you do with the pedal, no revs increases. So he has been stuck a couple of times now. So that is what we're going to look at this week. But luckily, I love wiring. So this is the Audi TT 225 BAM engine code. It's a 1.8 20 valve turbo engine. He bought this purely as a conversion donor because he's got a really nice Scirocco, and he was going to drop this out and put it in his Scirocco. But the more he used the Caddy, the more he started to like it, and plans started to change. It is a little bit rough around the edges, but sometimes they are the most fun car. We've got a lot of power here, and it can be a lot of fun. But when it's in your pristine pride and joy, you're always worried about scratching it or scuffing it, or if the wheels rub, or if you stick it in a hedge somewhere. But when you've got a car like this that you're not too worried about, it makes the whole experience a lot more fun driving it. When I first opened the bonnet on this, I could see it was a very homemade conversion. There was wiring everywhere. It's not been connected up quite right. The joins between the Audi TT engine loom and the Mark 1 Golf car loom are a little bit questionable. But at the time, because he was going to drop it out, I didn't do too much with it, and I was going to make a new loom when the engine was out. Now it's staying in, this is something that needs to be addressed, because I think all this dodgy wiring is the problem with the throttle. Because on these, there's no mechanical linkage between the pedal and the throttle body. They're what's called drive-by-wire, and it's purely electronic. So there's a sensor in the pedal when you put that up and down. There's a motor in the throttle that opens the throttle. And I think the problem in the wiring, joining the two together, is causing this malfunction. So this conversion link is under the air filter here. You can see they've put in a little fuse box, and although it does do the job, apparently the conversion was done in 2015. So 8 years of these terminals being out in the elements. It's not a watertight fuse box. This all needs to be sorted. All the wires come out a little bit tight. The connections aren't connected where they're supposed to be. When the car first came in, the fuel pump was wired straight off the ignition. So the whole time the ignition was on, the fuel pump was on. So it's just constantly whirring away, whereas that should be controlled by the ECU. Because if you have a problem with a fuel line underneath, the engine cuts out, the fuel pump will carry on pumping fuel out all over the floor. Less than ideal. When it's controlled by the ECU, the fuel pump is only running when the engine's running. So if the engine stops for whatever reason, the ECU will cut the fuel pump. So I did just rectify that. This is the little box from the Audi TT, and this houses the main engine ECU relay, and I put the fuel pump relay in there and wired it to the ECU. So when you turn the ignition on, the fuel pump primes, and it won't run again until the engine starts up. But like I say, I didn't go too much into this because we were going to take all the engine out, and I was going to make a new loom while it is out. Now it's staying in, I need to sort this out. This little fuse and relay box is from the Audi TT engine bay, and it's part of the loom, but on the BAM conversion, the only thing that sits in here is the main relay. Also, the secondary air injection relay sits in here, but as that's all been deleted, we haven't got that in here anymore. But what there is in this little bay is these empty fuse holders. So then we can rewire all this fuse box and have it actually in this main body, because then that clips in there. The fuel pump relay will sit in there. The lid goes on, and it's all sealed to the elements, hidden away, and looks a lot neater. And then we get rid of all these wires and all these loose connections. Now, making a conversion on these isn't quite as straightforward as an older engine where you just connect up an ignition live, a power, a battery live, and an earth, and you can pretty much run the engine. On these, everything is controlled by the ECU. So there's one main power relay. So the ECU just gets a little signal from the ignition switch, and that fires that up. Then the ECU decides what it wants to turn on and when. Because for example, the lambda sensors on these have little heaters in them, and if they're running when the engine's not running, they can overheat without the flow of air going over them. So again, that is controlled by the ECU, like the fuel pump, to only run when the engine itself is running. Now, I have already noticed that everything on here is run off the ignition. Like the fuel pump was, when you turn the ignition on, everything is live. So that's another thing I'm going to rectify here, have it just as the Audi TT intended. So just to remind myself, I've been trawling through the BAM wiring diagrams the last few nights. This is a great enjoyment for me. I love wiring diagrams. I love going through wiring diagrams. I love making my own wiring diagrams. Usually people run away from wiring like the plague, but for me, I absolutely love it. So I can't wait to open all this up, work out what goes where and find out what they've done, chuck all that away and make our own little fuse box in this panel. So first things first, I'm gonna strip the air filter and bits out, start uncovering the loom because there's so much stuff in here that's not actually used. We've got loads and loads of wires that are just curled up, tucked away, and I need to find out where the ignition feed is for the ECU because it should be going down here and it's not there. So it might be somewhere up the top. The wiring along here is all very questionable. We've got a big spaghetti junction of wires all taped up there, so that needs all uncovering. The ECU is up here. There's going to be a lot of stuff cut out and chucked away. So we have got our main power from the positive of the battery going into the fuse box. That comes out of there and then continues into the loom. Now I'm pretty sure if we go in here, yeah, so we've got red and white wire there, red and white wire here. So this power goes in, through there, into the relay, that's switched on by the ECU, and then that comes back out, powers up the coils that is for. Now the other three are for the injectors, solenoids, but then this purple wire here is for the coils. And that's run all linked off this ignition live. So I think although this main power goes in, goes to the ECU, that isn't being powered by the relay, that's being powered by this ignition live. So it's all a bit of a mess. Nothing's doing what it should be doing. So we're just gonna take it all out. We've got coils of wire bundled up under here. Some have got labels, some of that says, but it's not been used. So all of this can be coming out and just tidy up this area massively. Right, starting to unwrap and find a few things. So one thing I did notice is when I moved this fuse box, this is the main ignition live that runs everything on the engine, and the wires pulled out. So that wasn't a very good crimp. So that could be some of where our problems are coming from with this wiring. That big reel that was all wound up in there is all here. The one plug we do need for that is for the exhaust gas temperature that plugs in there. But all of this is the Audi TT loom. So we've got the reverse lights for the Audi TT and we've got the starter wire for the Audi TT, but both of them are run off the MK1 loom. So all of this can go. All we need is just this one plug. That's a nice bit we can get rid of. That's your airflow meter. There's the power, which will now go in the fuse box. So that's quite fitting because now the fuse will be next to the relay. So that can go straight in there, in that box. And up in this corner, this is where the car loom normally meets the engine loom on the Audi TT. There's a load of these plugs, and that's where the engine loom side and the car loom side all connect in the ECU box up at the top. So these have all been cut off, so that's where all the old plugs would be. So all these bare wires really need taping up because any misconnection in there will cause some issues. But we've got the lambda sensor plug there. This one's for the throttle pedal, so that goes down and must go through to the throttle pedal. These are ignition lives coming out. This must go to the key, because this ignition live is the one that ran the fuse box over there. And it's also linked into the ignition live for the ECU. This is the little wake up one the ECU needs. And it also straight into this one. I have to double check that. But this shouldn't be ignition live up here because that's not even fused. These two are ones that I put in for him. This one's for the rev counter and this one's for the OBD port. So they run down behind the dash. So they're my ones. It's the other ones. I need to find out what they're for and connect them up where they should go. And then we've got to do a big tidy up here and just make sure all these are taped up and safe. This will all be things like cruise control, air conditioning. That's the other end of the starter wire that we said we're not needing over there. So the reverse lights will be in here, the alternator light, everything that the MK1 is using for the TT, that's all in here. So we've got lots more tidying to do, but at least now we can see what is going on. And this might have been our cause for all these electrical anomalies. And looking under the dash, at the other side where that grommet comes through, you've got those two big wires. The two little ones for the rev counter and the OBD port that I put in. These big ones do indeed go right to the back of the ignition switch. So it looks like one is connected to the ignition and one is connected to the permanent live, which is a bit of a weird way of doing it because you've got permanent lives by the battery. Here's that drive-by-wire throttle. So like I say, it's just a sensor, and it's got the plug at the top which goes through the bulkhead, and that connects to the ECU. So there's no throttle cable, it's just two potentiometers in there telling the ECU what your foot is doing. So now I know this one is an ignition live and this one is a permanent live. We need to figure out why they've connected it up here, whether it's an afterthought, but that shouldn't be there. So I've just been diving back into the wiring diagrams. Knowledge is power. I had made some notes from my homework before I came down here, but as I was going through and finding what I needed, I found the red and green coming out at 6M. 6M is the brown plenum chamber plug. So the brown one of these holds this red and green wire here. That's the fuse in, but this is unfused because it comes straight from the battery, so there's no fuse on that one. And this one, which is connected to this big ignition feed, is in fact the blue-yellow for the airflow meter and lambda sensors, also not fused. So that is on a permanent ignition live. And I couldn't work out why I didn't have the airflow meter wire down at the fuse box over there. And that's because it's wired directly to the ignition switch. So no fuse on that. No fuse at all for the main ECU, less than ideal. And also this power here should feed our main ECU relay here, but that had its feed coming in straight to the battery here. So they had in fact got it wired both sides of this relay. So both sides of these were in fact live. So it wouldn't matter if this relay was in or out, it wasn't actually doing anything. So there wasn't a lot of safeties on this. So we're gonna sort all that out, get it done properly, as per Audi intended. So it's starting to look a bit cleaner in there because all the spaghetti is on the floor. The ECU has two plugs in it. One is attached to the engine and that runs all the engine. That's your smaller plug. The larger plug is the one that connects to the car loom. So that's where all our plugs were up in the scuttle, all the ones we're not using. There are a couple of extra ones on here because of the way the bay is. So we've got our lambda sensors up that end and we've got our airflow meter up this end. But this is where all our powers should come in, all the connections to the battery. This is also where the starter and reverse light wires are on all the TT. We've got the main ECU earth here as well, which I did see was on the scuttle. And that's not looking the best there. So that might have been some of the problems, but we're looking a lot cleaner in the scuttle now. And most of this we can get rid of. So let's open this up. And there we are, all unwrapped and naked. So now we can see what we're dealing with. So we've got the ECU plug in the middle, and that was up in the scuttle. All the ones that went along the scuttle to the other side, to this top corner up here. We got our lambda plugs, so we need to keep them. We got our throttle pedal, need to keep that. We got our two for our rev counter and our OBD port, need to keep them. But all of these now can go. And there's the starter and reverse for the TT. These are all like CAN bus, cruise control, other sensors connected to the engine. Don't need any of them. And on this side is the other end of those starter wires. So now they can, those black ones there can all go in the bin. We've got our airflow meter there, our main relay there. And what I've discovered, which I thought was the case from the wiring diagrams, is up in our scuttle corner, we had this red and green, which was connected through the Mark 1 loom straight to the battery. Well, that goes along here, in here, and before it goes into the plug, it's here. The red and green is actually joined to the white and red that has a little takeoff, tiny little wire there. That's just the main power to the ECU to save the memory. But then the white wire comes along, up and into the bottom of our relay. The ECU switches the relay, and then the power comes out, and that should go to the coils. But they had it going through the fuse box and straight to the battery. Then they had the coils connected here, but that was run off an ignition live. So this wire should have gone to the purple and black out of here. So this relay wasn't actually doing anything, and that was live all the time. It never turned off. So we're going to connect this the right way up. So this is going to run the coils, and this side is going to run the car from the battery, and then we'll be back on track. I know I said most people do avoid doing the wiring. Maybe some people that have a go should also avoid doing the wiring. So let's get snippy and get rid of all this stuff that we don't need. So now I'm putting all the feeds over to where the fuse box is. Lucky we've got this relay in here, so we know exactly how long the wires need to be to reach the fuse box. So I've just got to extend the ones over. So we've got our powers and our feeds. I'm using crimps to join them. So they're just the open barreled crimps, just like they use from the factory. I've just got this one on here, and they crimp together nicely. You can see in this one here, that's exactly what they use in the factory looms. They crimp them over. So there's no solder, it's an open barrel crimp and then heat shrunk over. So I've done this one here, and you can pull that as hard as you want. And because they're crimped onto the insulation as well, they won't go anywhere. So we'll heat shrink them, and then we'll have our loom made up, and we'll have them all popping out into the fuse box. And I'm using adhesive shrink wrap as well, which has a glue in it, which makes it even stronger and keeps it watertight. One done. And now I've just deadheaded all them ones that were bunched up in the scuttle all the way up there. They didn't need to be there. So chopped them off, made them safe so they're all insulated. Got my fuel pump trigger going down to the relay box as well. What I'm going to do now is try it in the bay, because what happens if you tape it all up tight on the floor and then go and put it in the bay where it comes along from the ECU and then comes out of the firewall, that doesn't sit naturally. So if we can get it all in the bay first, work out what shape it's got to be and then tape it up, that'll be a lot better. And then we've just got to take the few wires from the engine loom, the other bit that goes into the ECU. This one goes back into the engine loom itself. We've got these wires poking out. We only need a few of these. We need these two here and this one here to go to our fuse box. All these ones are just spares for things like the speed sensor that we don't use anymore, a few other oil level sensors, things like that. So we won't need any of them. That's the oil pressure to the dash, although I don't actually think that's connected to the dash. We'll look at that as well. So all we need is these two, this one, extend them and take them up to where our fuse box is going to be. Things are all finding their places. So we've got everything now sprouting up into the bottom of the fuse box where all the terminals are going to go. So that'll go in nicely. They'll run down there through the grommet. We've got an anchor point here now. So I've drilled a hole, probably put a nice little P-clip, because then the loom will actually be secure engine side, and then that'll flex to there. We've got everything running up nicely. We've got our airflow meter here. Got our exhaust gas temperature sensor, go in there. Everything's running along the back nicely, so that's all nice and comfortable now. And then up in this corner, we've got our lambda sensor, plug in there. We've got our throttle pedal, plugging in there. The only long one we've still got is this long one all the way around here, which is our other lambda sensor, which has just got to plug in just down there. So it hasn't got to be this long. So I don't really want to cut it, so I might just fold that back on itself. Take this sheathing off, so we haven't got a big coil that can disappear into the loom, because without this on, it's only that big. So we can hide that back in the loom, tape it all up tight, and then that will disappear into there. It'll just look a lot neater, even though it's got a scuttle cover that goes in there. That'll just keep things neater, and you won't have this big massive snake sitting in there now. And then we've got our fuel pump wire, which is going to sneak in the back, up into the bottom of the fuses. We'll put the proper terminal on. So yeah, things are working out nicely. So I can almost start taping it up into its final positions and start putting all the terminals in, because this cover, the relay's sitting there. That cover sits in there. This is where our fuses will go. So all these wires will be terminated properly onto there. And the terminals we've got are over here. So these are the proper VW terminals that actually go up into there. I've got ones with the big terminals on for the thicker wires and ones with smaller terminals for the thinner wires. And they came from Freeway Components, so thank you for them. Nice good quality OE terminals. They're the same as the little ones you get in the plugs, but these ones are twice the size for holding the fuses and clipping that holder nicely. So it'll be a really nice factory install. And I've just done a little test on one. So let's finalise where this loom sits, get it taped up, and then I can start terminating it to the fuse box. And boom, that is looking much neater. So all the main loom, this one here, is now all wrapped up. We've just got our wires going to the bottom of the fuse box. These are some earths, and that's all looking much better in there. I've took this loom back out, also looking amazing. So we've got our ECU plug, then up this end, we've got our lambda and throttle pedal, and then I've shortened the other one, so it's just long enough to reach the other plug. So you saw me there as well, make a plan. So I've got it all written out in the little fuse box where I want everything to run, because it's easy to get confused when you're pinning in the back. So even I write everything down, and all I think I will do, I've got these labelled at the moment. It's not really going to matter because once they're clipped in, they're never going to come out. But for anyone in the future that might be working on this or maybe needs to do some fault finding, my label maker actually prints off heat shrink with labels on. So I'm going to do that for each wire, so we all know where we're at. So I'll get all the labels printed out. So we want heat shrink tube, auto length. Let's get going. Battery, okay, print. Okay, battery, and it's in heat shrink, so I can shrink that onto the wires. And we've made a good start, got most of the things plugged in. Looking good. Got our main power that will come in, so all that's going to go to the battery is just this one red wire. So that's going to look nice and neat and tidy. Managed to find a little relay holder that sits in there. So we've got our two relays that will clip in, and they're all wired in on the back. So now we can get this in and connect the last few bits in the bay, and we'll be back together. The last one to go in is fuel pump. Shrink that on, and then all that's left is the ignition live that goes to the ECU. That's going to go into the CADDY fuse box, which is just under the dash behind the bulkhead there. So we'll use the proper ignition feed for that, and then we'll be all wired up. And we are all back together. Just had a little mid-session tidy up as well, because it was getting a bit messy around here, and I don't like working in that. But the fuse box is in. We've got all our fuses that we need for the conversion in there. So we've got main power in, coils, fuel pump, airflow meter and lambda, the injectors and sensors, and then the two main relays as well. And then the TT cover still goes on, and that sits in there looking nice and factory. I've also tidied up the rest of the loom in there, because remember it was just a big spider's web around here where we had the old fuse box in, then it all kind of went into the engine loom. So that's all tidied up. We've got our exhaust gas temperature sensor back in. I've shortened the starter wire so that fits a bit nicer. We've got it going up to the battery. So there's our positive on the terminal, and that leads into our fuse box. The only thing I haven't connected up is these two wires are for the Mark 1 oil pressure light. On the Mark 1 they have two sensors, a high and a low, whereas on the TT they only have a traditional one, so you can't just connect the two up. So he hasn't got the right sensors in here, so he hasn't got a light on the dash, but there is an oil pressure gauge in the car, so it might not be too much of a worry. But if we do want to put the sensors in, I didn't want to tape it up, so I've just put a little plug for there to sit on. You might have seen me put a little bit of solder on the bottom of the terminals, even though they're crimped. That's because when I looked at the original terminals, these are actually out of a VW loom with them terminals on, and these are actually crimped and then soldered. So it must have been a VW way of doing it. So I copied that on. So the last thing we've got to connect up is just this ignition live. So when you turn the ignition on, this power goes to the ECU, then the ECU decides when to turn the relays on. Now I'm a bit curious on what fuse box system it is, because this is a Mark 1 Golf Caddy, but this is a 1991 H-Reg. The Mark 1 Golf changed over to the Mark 2 Golf in about 83, 84-ish. So all Mark 1s had a CE1 fuse box. But after 1990, Mark 2 Golfs went from a CE1 to CE2 fuse box, and this is a 91. So the Mark 1 Golf never had a CE2 system. So let's have a look and see what it has got. Well, I can see straight away it is a CE1 fuse box. So it's a 91 car with a CE1 fuse box, which is a bit odd, but that's what they must have carried on making the Mark 1 with. So we'll find our ignition live, run that in, and we'll be nearly all connected up. So got pin D out, which is the white one, my normal go-to pin for the coil live. And I remembered this used to be a diesel, so it's not got a coil pin on it. So I'm not sure whether there is going to be an ignition live on here or not, which could possibly be why they ran those wires directly to the ignition switch, which will still work, so that might have to be the one I use. Sometimes they have a diesel filter heater or something like that that's on an ignition live, but the pins where they should be here is empty. Let's go for a plan B. We might have to link over there and put a fuse in it. I just had a little hunt around in our storage, and what might I find? A Mark 1 Golf wiring loom with exactly what we need. So I can take this big pin out here and a bit of wiring and slot that into the fuse box inside and connect the engine exactly how it should be, because I knew I wouldn't be happy just tapping into the switch. That's not the right way. That's the right way. And out of the plug, there it is. That's the pin we need, and it's got a little spade on the end so we can connect to it and have a disconnect so you can still take the loom off. Other thing I've noticed, we've also got one for the clocks here, because he's looking to add a rev counter, GTI clocks. So we might need an extra pin, so we've got that as well. So let's get this into our fuse box. And as easy as this, and click. We now have our 3 big ones, and we have the proper ignition live for the engine. Let's run our wire down. Maybe we'll try for a start. And as we've got different colour wires, just to save any confusion, let's put a flag on it. Engine ignition, like that, and they're called a cable flag because they look like a little flag, like so. Even with the proper terminal, factory finish, and got this handy little helper for when you've got a grommet and you want to get a big plug through it. Stick that on. Open it up, and your grommet is on. So we'll get that through the bulkhead, get it to our fuse panel, and plugged in. Nicely done, Ron, just like factory. All right, everything back on. There still is a few little bits to tidy up, but I've got the battery on. I just want to check whether it works, because this new little fuse box controls the entire engine. So if something's wrong, I'd rather find out now. And also make sure our fuse box is working where we've put that pin in. That should be live. So key in. Fuel pump primed. Fire straight up. Everything is working. Let's just see if it's got throttle, because that's one of the issues. It's alive and looking much better. So something I noticed when we were diagnosing this throttle problem is the plug for the throttle body is actually broken. So the little tab's missing, so it doesn't click in. I don't think that was the problem. I don't think it was coming off, but I have got a new plug, so we can just deep in this, swap the plugs over. I don't have to put the new terminals on, so I'll just make a note of what goes where. And at least then that'll eliminate that, and then we'll know this is on secure. wires back in, a little horseshoe back on, little tab facing up, and that locks them all in. It's in there. That can click back on with a click this time, and click. I took the wires off one by one, but as always, you saw me make a list. It's always best to write them down because they might all fall out at once and you haven't got a clue where you're going. So always make a list. Here is the old one. As you can see, the little tab's broken off. I see this every single day on every single Volkswagen. See this one, the coil one's been broken all around the engine. Every Volkswagen and Audi ever. People just don't seem to know how to take these off. Give you a little super on tech tip. Put your finger on it, just touching, push it in to the sensor, then push it down and then pull it out. If you're already pulling, when you put that tab down, you'll never get it out because it locks in. So you've got to push in, push it down, that'll release it and then it'll just pop out. Otherwise, people get cross, ram a screwdriver in there and then it never clicks on. So that might not have been the trouble, but we know now it's never going to be a trouble. The other thing we couldn't do before was get a throttle body alignment on it because there's too many errors. So now, basic settings, 060. It's going through its settings. Adaptation, okay. So that is one tick that we weren't getting before. Okay, with the bay all finished, we've just got to tidy up in here because this is a bit of a mess. So under the dash here, we've still got our two wires that went to the key, which they were running the ECU off. So we've got our unfused main direct battery live, so we can get rid of that. And the ignition live also unfused. And that should, if we unplug the key, yeah, you can see where they've joined them in there. So we can just take them out, return this to factory, and we don't need those anymore. The other thing we're going to do under here is the rev counter, because on a Mark 1 they have the rev counter on the dash, even though this is a base spec, so he's just got a clock in there at the moment, but he wishes to put a rev counter in. The problem is the ECU sends out a digital signal, but on the Mark 1 system that gets its feed from a pulse from the coil. Well, we haven't got a coil now, so you get this little box of magic tricks where it receives the ECU signal and converts that into an old analog signal to go up to the clocks. He did have a little rev counter in the middle, but he wants to put some GTI clocks in. So I've just unplugged out the back of the clocks here, and pin 5 should be a red and black. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so there's our red and black. That's our rev counter wire that used to get its feed from the coil, which we haven't got. And coming out of this little box of tricks, it says red black to the tack. Nice and easy. So coming out of here, we do have a red black, which is this one here. So I just need to run this to the red black here, join them together, and then when he puts his GTI clocks in, that'll plug in and work. Well, I've just unwrapped those taps into the ignition switch, and this is what we're dealing with. So this was the main power to the coils. As you can see, it's just kind of wrapped around half of it. This is the problem with soldering such thick wires. You can't get enough heat in it. And this one was the main ignition live. So we'll chop all this out, repair it all back together. It looks like, luckily, they didn't cut the original wires. They just kind of wrapped around and tried to solder into it unsuccessfully. But luckily, it looks like the original wires are still intact. So we can just take this out and repair this back to factory. Less than ideal. And all back in. Everything's in its place now. Stuck this on so it's not just hanging around. We are connected up to the back of the clock, so as soon as he puts that rev counter in, that'll fire up. And the other thing, the glow plug light always used to come on as if it was preheating, even though it's not connected to anything anymore. So I took the glow plug relay out because we don't need that anymore. Stopped that light coming on and stopped the loom living up. The other thing, he's got this aftermarket steering wheel on, which doesn't have a horn squib in the middle. So he was trying to get it working on a button, which I have now succeeded. And all it was a blown fuse. So that's a nice easy fix. So let's tuck all this away. And tick, under trays all in, OBD ports there. So it's nice and easy to plug in, just like a factory car. We are all good. So we're on, fuel pump primes. Let's start it. it is looking good. So that's all along the scuttle, all back in. Looking much nicer now, much more tidy up this corner. Everything just sits in there a lot neater, and we haven't got that massive spider web of wires. I put some protectors around the cut through where the lambda wires go through, so that's a lot neater as well. The last thing I wanted to do is, because this hasn't got a Mark 1 box anymore, the reverse plug is wrong for the reverse light switch, which is down there. So I've just bridged this one, and the reverse lights do work. So if I just extend some wires into the bottom of the switch, we should have full reverse lights as well. Something this car has never had. When we replaced the throttle body plug, it actually came with new terminals. So I've just put those on a wire, and that will fit into our plug. So I'm just gonna heat shrink over them so they don't touch. We should have reverse lights. And there it is on. Had to trim the socket back a bit and a bit of hot glue in there, and that has made it. So I just connected that up to the original reverse wires. Let's see if it works. Hooray! Okay, battery all bolted back in, boost pipe all on, everything's connected and plugged in. I think we are ready for a test drive. Now, a little bit worried about this because before I started filming this episode, I just took it out for a little spin just to see if I could find out what was wrong with it. And the throttle body gave up completely and I was stranded. I had to call my dad to come and give me a tow back up the unit, reminding me of many instances of my younger days. But now all the wiring is complete, I'm much more confident, so we shouldn't have any more trouble. Now it starts like a brand new car. Right, let's give this another test drive. The boost is feeling a lot stronger at the moment. I fixed that boost pipe and I think that's been leaking for a long time. It's been pouring down here, so the roads are pretty slippy, so I don't think we're going to have any performance launches, but I just want to know the reliability of this throttle pedal and the rest of the wiring. So I'm taking it for a nice long drive round, turn it off, turn it on, try bumpy roads, smooth roads, keep it at the same speed. Just try and cover all the parameters before I give it back to him again. So far, so good. Right, I've been driving it around for about 20 minutes now and it is golden. I've pulled over, turned it off for a little while, let it settle, started it up, drove for the dual carriageway for a bit. But I've forgotten how insane this thing is. I'm sure now all this throttle problem's sorted, it's even more responsive because it's so much more throttle responsive now. In third it just takes off. And he's got this little GPS thing that tells you the speed now as well, so we actually know how fast we're going. But you drop it down in third, comes onto boost, and torque steer all down the road, absolutely flies. So I think with this boost pipe fixed, with this throttle body problem fixed, all the electrics are now getting their full 12 volts. This thing is flying. So I'll take it back to the unit now, plug it back in, check all the fault codes, check nothing's flagged up. I've been trying to convince him for ages that Mark 1 20 valve turbos are so cool. They're just like a turbo Nova, they're lightweight, they've got lots of power, and there's a modern engine, so they are super reliable. But with this car in particular, he's had nothing but trouble. But as you can see from the conversion, it was all a bit messy. And although jobs might be okay like that at first, after a while, wires fall out, voltages drop, and it just leads to lots and lots of problems. But now, this is awesome. It's got all the boost. Giving it a check over and everything looks tip top. So I think we can call this one done. Got all the covers back on, got the scuttle cover back on. It's all looking much neater around the edges. All around the battery's much better. We haven't got that mess of a fuse box in there now. So all of that has gone and unneeded. And everything is kept nice and neat in here. And I've got the label maker out again. So I've labelled the 2 relays, fuel pump and coils. We've got our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fuses, and then what they are. So we've got the main 12 volt, the coils, the fuel pump, the airflow meter, lambda injectors and solenoids. And that clicks in just like factory. And it looks a lot better along the top, without that big spider's web sticking out there doing nothing. So I'm now happy that is a very nice conversion. So I think we can wrap this one up here. This has been a great success. I did know last time I worked on it, the wiring was a mess and it did take a lot of self-control not to go through it back then, but that's because the engine was planned to come out, be in a conversion for another car and I was going to do it then. Now the engine is staying in there, we've done it all properly and he won't have any trouble anymore. Also got the other little jobs ticked off, like now he's got reverse lights. The rev counter's going to be all connected up and ready to go when he puts the GTI clocks in. And in the end, if he does still want to do a conversion, he can take this out and drop it straight in his Scirocco. It is all ready to go and all still fully removable. So I'm going to have a little tidy up here, get the car back to the owner. So I'm sure if you're local to us, you'll see this out and about. And if you do fancy a race, I would have second thoughts because this absolutely flies. So make sure you give this video a like, be sure to tune in next time because we're sure to be back on something cool. But until next time, make sure you have fun.